Hello, everyone, and thank you again for joining our AMA series. This week, we're joined by Waves, and I am Tina Baker-Taylor, UK General Manager for Crypto.com. I'm delighted to be your host for today's live stream. If you've ever bought a car or a house, you've likely experienced the frustrating friction inherent in most types of complex transactions. Many industry leaders have felt the exact same pain, and the idea of implementing smart contracts on the blockchain was born. Smart contracts can streamline complex processes that involve several intermediaries who lack trust amongst the other participants in the transaction. But there are some who say that many of the layer one products and protocols today are logic heavy and hard to use and can overcomplicate dApp development. Waves believes that the development of new tokens and the applications that govern them should not be that different from launching a traditional web application, and Waves enables the creation and trading of crypto tokens without the need for extensive smart contract programming. It's our pleasure to be joined today by Sten Laureyssens. I'm so sorry, I probably murdered your name. Strategic Advisor for the Waves Association. Thank you for joining us, Sten.
Hey, thank you, Tina. And actually, it was great. Usually, because it's a weird combination of letters, usually it comes out, but it came out perfect. So,
well, yay me. Yeah. So, Sten, you're going to be responding to some of the questions that were submitted by our communities this week. And for our viewers, if your question was selected for today's stream, you may have won a share of the Waves prize pool. So, look forward to that. So, Sten, can you start us off with a quick introduction about yourself, and then we will jump into an overview of Waves?
Sure, absolutely. First of all, thank you for having me. I'm pretty excited, especially after reading the questions that the community submitted. It was clear that these weren't the usual AMA questions. Like, people really did their research and took time to like dive into what we have, what we're doing. And so I'm definitely looking forward to answering some of the questions. About myself, so I'm Sten Laureyssens. So you were very close. So I'm the strategic advisor for the Waves Association. And the Waves Association is kind of the foundation behind the ecosystem of Waves. I'm mainly, like, my day-to-day involvement sort of falls on getting close with the community, in a sense that I'm kind of a bridge between what the community is feeling, what they're thinking, what they're looking forward to, and aligning that at the same time with the tech development that is happening in a pretty complex system. Like, every time I try to explain it the first time, people say, like, hey, but it's similar to, like, or Ethereum, but then there's all these other stuff. Like, how does this work together? So that's kind of my day-to-day task, like trying to align the progress that's being made on the technical side and position that in a sense that people are interested in looking at it, but at the same time they have a benefit of doing so. Yeah.
Indeed. Well, the community is critical to the growth and scale of a protocol like yours, for sure. But being able to make sure that they understand what the benefits and opportunities are is critical, right? So Waves is described as building the infrastructure that enables inter-chain DeFi. So could you give us a quick overview of the ecosystem? Because, as you said, at first glance, it seems a bit complex.
I think even people in our core community that have been with us for quite a while, they sometimes say, could you re-explain this to me, because it's quite complex. So I think the easiest way to explain it is that in the entire ecosystem, you have a few protocols that each have their own token and purpose. So you have Waves protocol, the one that everyone knows, and the one that is also being integrated in Crypto.com right now. So that's the one that people usually look at. That's what they go for. And in a sense, Waves protocol is the foundation, sort of, in a sense that the way that it's built enables some of the other protocols that are built on top to position themselves uniquely in, let's say, our DeFi industry, or the DeFi focused industry, in a sense. Okay. So It's a proof of stake blockchain. It did an ICO in 2016, so we're getting close to 5 years right now. And I think it shows both in a positive and in a negative sense. Waves is so, let's say, foundational for the ecosystem, and people have been so long in the ecosystem as community members, or even like community members moved into team members. Like it's a very dense community. People are friends. There's a lot of chatter. There's also a lot of discussions. Like they keep it very close in their heart, and it leads to a unique synergy between like positive and sometimes negative feedback loops of trying to figure out where do we go as an ecosystem and how do we like do that together with our community. But that's like, let's say, Waves protocol. And then aligned with that, we have Gravity Tech, which is an interoperability focused protocol, but without a token. So it doesn't have its own token. You can't buy anything or invest in anything, but the other side of the functionality is identical to any other interoperability focused protocol. And then you have Neutrino protocol, which is a mixture of, or even a cluster of different tokens that, in a sense, are focused on assetization of different stable coins, whether that's dollar or euro, etc. But with a really unique synergy where all the tokens are backed by Waves sitting in a smart contract on top of the Waves protocol. I'll probably, because there were a few really good questions on that, I'll probably explain some of the individual things a little bit later on, but together they sort of comprise the baseline. Like it's Waves protocol, it's Gravity Tech, which is focused on the interoperability approach, and then Neutrino, which is very focused on building what you said initially, that interchain DeFi. The interchain is coming from Gravity, the DeFi focus is coming from Neutrino, and Waves is sort of enabling as a like base layer in a unique sense of like what's unique to Waves.
Okay. Yeah. That's a great summary. And yes, you're right. We've seen a lot of new questions about Neutrino come from the community. So I know we're going to dive into that a little bit deeper. So as you look at the problems that Waves is intending or is actually solving today, what problem do you think Waves is solving in a unique way? And why is that problem important to solve?
I particularly like this question because it forces me to talk not about the glory side of the coin, but also the difficulty. I think what the biggest challenge for Waves is also what you said, like the unique approach that they have. So when Waves initially set out to start its project, do an ICO, they said, okay, let's make our own like Waves chain, let's make Waves DEX, which is now evolved into Waves Exchange. And then it was very clear, like, how do we move forward from this? Like, now that we have this base infrastructure, smart contracts were implemented, and then the next steps. And obviously the ecosystem sort of evolved into a very DeFi-focused, like blockchain-based finance industry. But what I think the challenge is for Waves is the complexity of its nature, at the same time, is counterintuitive to its initial goal when it was launched. The initial goal was, let's bring blockchain to a global adoption level, and let's do that through Waves. So the idea was twofold, essentially. Waves wanted to create a big infrastructure that allowed for a different approach than Ethereum, that was more focused on like cheaper transactions, super fast transactions at the same time. Not necessarily with the big focus of let's make 1 million transactions a second chain, but more like what do we need to get to the point where it has sufficient scalability and speed to be able to build something on top of it. And that's kind of what Waves protocol is. But the challenge here is that it's so complex, but you want to bring it to a very, let's say, novice audience, because a lot of the people that are joining the industry now, they're just learning what's like how everything works, and some of the actions are pretty complex, and the gravity of making a mistake with, let's say, crypto assets can be big. So they're very focused on that big infrastructure, but then they also want to build products that matter today, like that you can use already today, and not like, okay, we've built this infrastructure and let's see where that leads us. Maybe someone will develop something on it. No, they're setting an example of, okay, we've built this, but this is what's possible, and this is what we think people need today. And that's kind of where you see like Neutrino coming from. It was originated from that idea. Some of the other stuff, like I'm pretty interested in SwapFi myself. It's a different AMM on Waves, and then you have also DeFi, which we'll probably talk about later, which is a decentralized forex. But as you can hear, like decentralized forex, a different approach to like, let's say Uniswap combined with Curve, like it's very user oriented. It's not like protocol focused, like here communication and data transfer. No, it's like, here, go and use this because you can already use it today. That's that, I don't know, duality in a sense, which is also a bit bipolar because it's two total opposites of the coin, I'd say.
Yeah.
And that's a challenge to like get that across also in a messaging, especially when it gets so complex.
Sure, indeed. And I think that, you know, the way that, you know, the industry can best do that is actually describe the problem that you're trying to solve or the opportunity, as opposed to the tech. But, you know, we're very tech driven, and I think we often fall back into the tech, being technologists, and then, you know, the benefits become murky again. So looking back over 2020, how would you rate your progress around, you know, the addressing of those challenges? And, you know, looking back over the year, what might you have done differently?
You know, it's always a good thing to sort of like at the start of the year say, okay, this is what we want to achieve. But I always like looking back because hindsight is obviously 2020. But especially in crypto, because so many things are happening, and there's always this what if scenario, like, oh, what if we would have done this? What if we did that? I think what really, for me personally, because there's a few things in different angles that were achieved, but for me personally, the most interesting one is how Waves managed to create a unique yield generation mechanism that is originating from, like, let's say, Waves protocol using block rewards. I can explain it in detail, but like essentially you're generating yield on a stable coin, and the yield is coming from like Waves related block rewards. But you're reaching your audience by porting that stable coin into Ethereum and essentially bringing it into the audience that, you know, here is our audience. And there's no pride of, oh, this is not happening on our chain, it's happening on another chain. It's more like means to an end. We know that we have something unique, and let's just take the risk, and there's no risk, but let's take the step of putting it into Ethereum and try to implement it into Ethereum related DeFi protocols. And that really worked well. There was quite some traction in a very short amount of time. In a very short period, I think we reached close to 140 million like circulating supply for USDN, which is like Neutrino dollar, as we call it. And of course, it doesn't compare yet to, say, a DAI or a USDC, or, well, Tether will never happen in the current ratio. But for, let's say, a starting project, it's at least, for us, it was a confirmation of, okay, this direction is the right approach. Let's keep building unique things that are inherent to the Waves technology stack, but then let's maximize the opportunity of bringing it into an audience where we believe that it will have an impact.
Sure. The halo network effect, essentially.
Yeah.
And being able to, you know, interoperate with, you know, cross-chain capability, I think is the direction that projects need to be looking at if they want to capitalize on the existing adoption that we have, instead of trying to recreate the wheel, right? Or steal market share. So let's talk a little bit more about DeFi. In the current state of the market cycle, DeFi has definitely received quite a lot of hype. And, you know, the hype will probably likely pass, the hype cycle, you know, it never stays. But the demand for earning yields on stablecoins, as you've just described, is definitely going to stay. So what can the Waves ecosystem offer for a profit-driven industry? And at a high level, what DeFi projects are Waves working on?
I think it's a few questions in one, but they all come down to the same, I guess. For me, what was really interesting is to see how DeFi has sort of like grown as an extension from creative experimentation in exchange, liquidity mining, but like centralized exchange focused. And that sort of led into, of course, in combination with Maker, that sparked a whole new industry of opportunity. And yes, the hype cycle will maybe not entirely pass, but definitely it won't drive these large peaks anymore. It will be a stagnant but consistent demand, because people need what's going on. Like the staking is one thing, but having the capacity to essentially, that's why we call it Lego block finance, but to stake different types of interest, one coming from borrowing and lending, one coming from a protocol incentive for liquidity mining, and one, essentially what's most unique is that behavior is harnessed in a way to incentivize people to interact with a protocol in a way that the founders from the protocol think that it will maximize the impact of their product. And that's such a unique alignment between the benefits of a community, which, as you said in the beginning, is the heart of every project. That counts for Waves, that counts for Crypto.com, it counts for anyone. But it also aligns the incentives together with the product, what they want to achieve, and there's no misalignment there. And that's super crucial. And that's also why I think that DeFi is here to stay, because different than maybe what we saw in the ICO boom, this won't, it was a misalignment between project and investors. And now it's much more aligned in that sense. And I think how Waves is intending to focus on that is, again, that duality between very rudimentary infrastructure that allows a certain type of innovation to happen, or a certain interaction between multiple chains or smart contracts, and then a very pragmatic approach of, hey, this is what we will build, this is how we think we could use our own technology. It's that duality again. And in that sense, like I said earlier, we have this unique combination that combines a Uniswap curve formula with a curve finance curve formula that allows you to have assets that are fluctuating in pools, and in the same protocol also have stablecoin assets that are being measured differently. And that's kind of what we see. Okay, this is what we see directly from our feedback from our community that they're looking for. So we built what we think will actually work and what is required. And that's kind of what we have, but the core of that is Neutrino protocol. That's without it, none of these other, like, let's say, side projects would be possible. We couldn't support any of those projects in our ecosystem.
Right. So speaking of Neutrino, so it sounds like a key player in order for Waves to deliver its interchain DeFi mission, right? Can you explain a little bit more what the Neutrino protocol is and how it functions?
I'll try to keep this one short because I could go on for a very long while on this. Also, because I think it's actually really interesting how it's similar to, for example, Maker, but then also entirely different. So, in short, Neutrino protocol is it's a protocol that focuses on assetization. So it means that the goal is to create assets that are pegged to something that could be, I don't know, it could be a unit of a cat, it could be a diamond, it could be gold, it could be Bitcoin, it could be dollar, doesn't matter. Any type of real world asset or digital in that sense. But it's pegged to one thing. The idea behind it is, though, that since everything is on chain, why not bring the collateral for this stable coin also on chain? But different than where Maker, you're essentially you're putting down collateral for kind of like an outstanding loan, and then you borrow against your assets.
Right.
Here it's different. Neutrino protocol has its own smart contract on Waves, and there is no liquidation risk of your assets, but it's also, you don't own the Ethereum, the virtual, in this case Waves. You essentially send Waves to the smart contract, and the smart contract sends you back a 1-to-1 ratio of the dollar value in, let's say, USDN, which is Neutrino dollar. So if I were to send $1,000 worth of Waves, which would be, I don't know, let's say a few, like maybe today it'll be like 1,600 Waves, or 160 Waves, but the $1,000 value, I will, like almost instantaneously, I will get back 1,000 USDN.
Okay.
So
okay.
I no longer own that Waves. That Waves is no longer mine. So I'm now the full owner of that USDN. So it gives me the capacity to exchange Waves into a stablecoin, 1-to-1, without having any liquidity issues or any order book depth, like there's no slippage, etc. It's just 1-to-1. The thing here where the unique part is what I said earlier about like creating a unique yield in one end and then porting it into Ethereum is Waves is still generating block rewards. It's a proof of stake consensus algorithm. So it means that you have block rewards, and it's around 6% per year that you earn with that. Now, the Neutrino contract is actually the owner of that Waves collateral that I've put in. So the collateral that I've put in that contract is no longer mine, but it's owned by a contract. But the contract automatically stakes the Waves, generates on a daily basis the block reward yield, and every time the Waves is paid out on a daily basis, it also again converts that Waves into USDN, and then it pays out that USDN only to people who are staking their USDN. Not everyone is staking it though, some people are trading it. So it creates this disproportionate balance between people who are trading it and don't get that yield, and people who are staking it and get that yield. So we get these sustainable interest generation anywhere between 8 and 15. We've seen spikes to 25% APY, but it's a sustainable mechanism. So it's not opportunity based. It's not because of borrowing and lending. It's just a totally new segment of yield generation for stablecoins. And it's not possible in let's say, I wouldn't call them competitors, but projects that are trying to achieve something similar. It's impossible for them to do that.
Well, Neutrino protocol and USDN has grown exponentially over the summer. And it, as you've just described it, it is pretty unique. So what do you personally think is driving the growth of this? Is it its uniqueness? Who is the market for USDN? What customer is this attracting?
I mean, you're striking the nail on the head here. I think that's kind of, looking back also at 2020, that's what we tried to decipher, like what were the catalyzing events that made this really work that well. And I think if we look at, for example, CurveFi's pool, in that Curve pool, we had like 3 stable coins and USDN in a meta pool together. And because of the built-in APY, we saw that people were deploying their voting equity curve that they locked for multiple years as a governance token perspective, who were just deploying their curve because they said, okay, I have USDN. It's already, like, I already have that asset, is generating me the most interest. Plus, if I will deploy my votes to increase the interest that you get from the curve incentives, then it was just like a positive feedback loop. The more that people were deploying their voting equity, the more the APY was rising, and for a certain period, that Curve pool was just permanently the most like the highest yield pool for Curve for, I think, almost like 6 to 7 weeks. And obviously that's just a matter of like supply and demand, and if there's opportunity, people will jump on that. So very quickly that grew into what is now sort of like a let's say fair basis. It's not really dropping below that value anymore.
Okay, so DeFi governance tokenomics is an interesting and creative place. at the moment, right? So NSBT acts as the governance token for Neutrino. Is that the design?
So what I probably skipped in my explanation earlier now is if you have the example of Maker, if, for example, your individual asset gets liquidated because Ethereum's value falls under a certain threshold, your assets get liquidated. The same could happen in Wave's example. So all the collateral that's sitting in the smart contract could fall under a threshold in a sense that it would have less outstanding Waves value in the contract as collateral than the outstanding USDN supply, which means that there would be a deficit. And essentially, whereas in Maker you can speculate on potential liquidations of individual people and arbitrate that opportunity, NSBT is the token that allows you to arbitrate any potential deficit of the smart contract. So rather than taking it from individual users, you can speculate on the downside and have that opportunity of, okay, I'm similar to what Basis Cash did, like you have some kind of a asset that you put down as a bond for a future potential scenario that would take place. So if there would be a deficit, my NSBT would essentially fill up the deficit. But the other way around is if the, and that's something pretty unique. I like how we named it. It was named Moon Factor. But the Moon Factor update for NSBT is also Moon Factor in a sense because the price of NSBT is determined by the smart contract. So you can always buy it from the smart contract at a certain price, but the price is determined by how much collateral there is for, let's say, the health of the ecosystem. So if the ecosystem is very healthy, after a certain level, it essentially does what we would say it goes to the moon because it becomes this exponential curve upwards in terms of price. So very quickly after it reaches, let's say, $5, $6, it goes up almost to like, we had this moment a few weeks ago where it moved to like $40, coming from originally from $1. Because of the massive over-collateralization of the ecosystem. And then on top of that, if you stake NSBT, you have that similar structure of people who are staking it get certain rewards, people who are not staking it don't get those rewards. So there's a very big incentive for people to like lock liquidity and lock assets down and reduce that supply essentially. And that's pretty unique in a sense because as you said, it's like quite creative how it happens, but here it's like voting power mixed with collateral and then a certain level of speculation. So it's quite interesting.
Well, and as we've seen in the DeFi space, things change pretty rapidly, right? So understanding that, how do you expect to solidify Neutrino's position in the market?
I think that's quite a challenge. I get that question almost on a daily basis, like how both from like team members and who are like overthinking and brainstorming, but also community members. Like
space is also quite crowded, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and from different angles. I think even as being crypto.com, like you have such an overlapping ecosystem that is so expansive that there's almost no way that you're not stepping on anyone's toes.
Right.
Yeah. So it's quite logical, I'd say. But it's the question number one. I would probably say, like, if I could employ a helpline and call, like, ask the opinion of the audience in that sense, as if it was like, you know, that one where they say how to become a multimillionaire, and then you have those four, like, eight lines. But I think the one way to really solidify is probably the most difficult part. And it's also where USDN is unique in a sense. If you look at some of the curve pools or even on Y-Earn, all those assets have interest that is being generated from lending and borrowing. Mm-hmm. And then also from that Y-Earn optimization structure. Yeah. And currently for USDN or even for Waves, there is no option yet to borrow or lend it in Compound or in Aave or in Cream, etc. So I think the big challenge for 2021 would be to successfully implement Waves and or USDN and to a certain degree NSBT into those lending protocols. Because once that the lending protocols give the opportunity of generating additional yield, then what was already very successful before will be even more successful now, because it was already competitive with just the base yield coming from, let's say, that Waves block reward system. Right. So if you add yield on top of that, it will only become more competitive. Yeah. And then I think once there's also multiple, let's say, farms also, and which are more like focused on the, let's say, the degen farm approach. But they're great for arbitrage. I see you laugh, but they're great for arbitrage because it just essentially, the more opportunities you have to arbitrage that asset, the more healthy your ecosystem will be and the less influence it can become. Yeah. And if you combine like the lending and the borrowing implementation with more pools where the asset can be traded, the structure is almost like a certain win, because it always has a higher potential for yields because of that unique built-in structure that Tether doesn't have or USDC doesn't have. It's something that currently, obviously it will come, but currently no one has that similar structure. So it has a step ahead in a sense.
Well, and you're also, developing a whole suite of products or projects that are intended to be tailored to DeFi. I'm guessing specifically designed to attract those blockchain-based finance investors. So we touched on it earlier. Let's talk a little bit about DeFo, or decentralized forex, SwapFi, and the Waves exchange.
So these three I would probably categorize. I've seen some pretty good questions around them, and most of them are asking like how do they synergize together? Like what's their role? What's their function? I think so. DeFo is the decentralized forex. SwapFi is that AMM that I talked about earlier that sort of combines Uniswap and Curve. And then you have Waves exchange. And I think to start maybe with Waves exchange, it's essentially a further iteration of the initial Waves DEX, which was, let's say, the ICO target. Like, okay, we will build our own chain and we'll build a DEX, and then we'll see further. But right now, for me, Waves exchange, it's actually not necessarily from a user experience and an interface perspective. It's not focused on the typical, let's say, heavyweight DeFi user. It's much more intuitive towards, let's say, from a more native perspective towards retail people who are just stepping into DeFi.
Well, that's helpful.
Yeah, exactly, and that's kind of the approach.
DeFi DEXs if you're a newbie, for sure.
I mean, the amount of people that I don't sit in the Telegram chats often enough, but very often we see these questions of, hey, I made a wallet on Waves Exchange, like I don't know, I went to a different computer, I don't have it anymore. How does that work? I wanted to enter my passport and it doesn't work anymore. And for that reason, we actually implemented email verification and login for a DEX, which is quite unique in a sense. So that people can still have like decentralized custody, but get their access to their keys in a way that they are used to from a centralized perspective.
Better utility.
Yeah, and I do like that. I mean, don't want to like linger too long on it, but anything that would be related to Waves Exchange is essentially from a very intuitive perspective. And actually, initially for me, coming from because I hadn't used Waves Exchange for a while, coming from centralized exchanges, my initial idea was, this is a shit user experience. Like I can't find anything. Yeah, and
I remember
after a while, I kind of don't want to go back because it's much more like it's much easier to find. It's actually really easy to use. So it's that different focus, I guess. But it functions as a very powerful wallet almost, with a built-in exchange, because both, for example, DeFo and SwapFi indirectly as well, but Neutrino. Most of the interactions that you can do with like Wave staking, Neutrino staking, swapping Waves to Neutrino, all of that can just happen straight from Waves Exchange. Essentially like an aggregator of different things all in the Waves ecosystem. So it's not really an exchange anymore. It's more than that. It's also not a wallet. It's like this unique combination. And probably what I think, apart from SwapFi, which just allows you to create liquidity pools, but then sitting on a chain that is almost instant in terms of transfers and costs you like 0.001 in terms of like fee in Waves, which is a few cents. It just offers a certain alternative to some of the issues that Ethereum has. Of course, it doesn't have that liquidity yet of this massive Ethereum base, but we're working on porting that again, like we did with Neutrino, where we port some kind of a similar structure into ETH and then make that synergy between the two chains. Just in a sense to say, okay, we know how we can have a unique position. Let's leverage the maximum that we can.
Okay.
And then, sorry to interrupt you there. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, no, that's not, I interrupted you. So DeFi, so it's a relatively newish term. What functionality does it offer?
So DeFi, it actually builds further on Neutrino. And this is maybe where it gets a bit complex. So I won't explain everything here. So you're just going to have to assume and believe that I'm not lying and that I'm not making this up. Okay. So you have USDN, which is the main stable asset inside Neutrino protocol. Now, what happened is Neutrino is backed and collateralized by Waves. So USDN is backed by Waves. Now, we wanted to create other currencies as well, because our ecosystem, in terms of our community, is pretty diverse. We have a pretty strong community in Belgium, in Holland, in Germany, which is originating from the original ICO. But then you also have like a very strong Brazilian and Portuguese community. And then we have like quite some people in Spain, Vietnam, Korea, China, like essentially pretty global. Not everywhere. I'm forgetting Turkey. They will kill me if I would have forgotten that. But essentially it's pretty diverse. And we thought, okay, this is where our community is. Let's look at what national currencies we can implement in a similar structure as USDN, but collateralized by USDN. So essentially, we're capable of creating individual baskets almost for every currency, and the yield is generated in a similar way, but isolated per pool. So all the assets that are backed for this individual pool, all the USDN yield that is generated is automatically staked because it's in a contract, but then it's converted, for example, to EUR-N, and then you would get the yield paid out in euro. So it's a similar structure, but then it allows you to, and this is again much more focused on like people who would need such a product today, where you can stake your, let's say, native currency that you're used to, rather than putting it in a bank account. You can stake it, have it with the benefits of crypto, but you don't have that inflation and almost inexisting yield that you don't get any interest these days in bank accounts. If you would get a few percent, it barely happens.
Right.
This way, you have that similar 8 to 15, usually for these, let's say, sub-currencies, it's a bit higher. We see like 11, 12, 13%. But that's nice. Someone in for example, in Vietnam that can like very natively, let's say your grandmother or your taxi driver could stake that without too much hassle. That's kind of what we think is needed. And of course, the DeFi focused, and I actually think that a lot of your audience of crypto.com is very knowledgeable in a sense, because it's not your usual new to crypto, let's say, hamster, as we say. Like most of the people are pretty like in the space for a while or have quite some assets. They understand it really well. So it's like a power user in a sense. And I see that in the questions. But for a lot of the newer people that will jump in, which will be a much larger user base in the next 3 to 5 years. They don't have that knowledge, and they will look for different ways of getting done what they want to get done. And I don't see someone go through a hassle of like setting up multiple Ethereum wallets, then locking it into like a pool, remembering that they have to pull it out at some point, there's no automation there. And that's kind of the different approach in terms of our, let's say, DeFi focused DApps in a sense.
Yeah. Well, we had a lot of questions from both communities about the community itself, and interestingly about governance. We had so many questions about governance, and so I think it's a pretty common approach today to involve or intertwine the community to influence protocol progress and functionality. We know that, right? Yeah. But how can the community participate in Neutrino and DeFi's governance?
I think personally, as a total side note to the story, it's one of the things that has stayed with me probably the most of last year. Aside from the behavior mining that I talked about earlier, the unique overlapping of, let's say, pure utility tokens that start overlapping with what many people would say, okay, this is functionality of a security token or securities. Like this is you have influence in the protocol, but it's open source. There's no ownership, but you kind of own it. It's this very complex mixture of you can use it, and at the same time you get to vote with it and you get to influence it. And it's also your reward because it's what you're getting back. So the more is this massive positive feedback loop where protocols have this very direct engagement with their ecosystem and their community. And it's just so dense. There's so many opportunities stacked on top of each other. And that really, I think that we haven't seen the last in terms of unique and creative setups around governance for that aspect. And in terms of like what's happening inside Waves for governance, what I really liked is we had these, for default, we had these rounds of, okay, what asset will be listed next? And people could vote for free with their NSBT. So every NSBT that they had, they could say, okay, I want this to happen, and I will put my votes on, for example, GBPN, or I think, I don't, forgive me if anyone from Ukraine is watching, but Ukrainian currency N, because I forgot what it was. It's a horrible, like pretty difficult name. But we saw that interaction where we could clearly feel where our strongest communities were, because they were voting heavily on, okay, we want this to be listed. But then at the same time, we've seen quite some feedback where we recently limited the supply of NSBT, which was also determined by a vote of the community. So it's similar probably in a sense to what most of the governance utility tokens are doing on ETH, but then in a different sense, that NSBT itself has this speculative asset or speculative aspect, sorry, and it's too complex, but it's also used actually as collateral for further derivatives. So it's like this multifunctionality approach, and it really requires the community to engage. And I think we're pretty, as I said earlier, it has these like positive feedback loops in the community, or sometimes negative, but there's also always a lot of feedback. And we're super, I think we're pretty grateful in that aspect, because we have this very direct bond, sometimes too direct, and we get, like, we have these good brainstorm sessions, and without it we wouldn't get anywhere, because without a community that's holding your token, that's engaging, or telling people, like, to their friends that have never like engaged with Waves, for example, say, hey, learn about this, talk about that, etc.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. Well, I'm conscious that the time is ticking on, and we haven't had a chance yet to talk about really one of the main pillars of the Waves tech infrastructure, infrastructure. So I want to shift our focus a little bit and talk about interoperability.
Yeah.
So after a bit of research, it seems that Gravity is taking a very uncommon approach to solving this crucial industry challenge, for sure. It's a big one. Can you explain a little bit about the arguments behind Gravity's approach?
So I think I said it in the beginning, right? So Gravity doesn't have a token. And to circle back a bit, like how we or Waves sort of arrived at that decision, the mindset behind that, it can also be found in what happened with USDN being ported to Ethereum. It was a means to an end approach, saying, okay, this is what we want to achieve, and let's strip everything away that we don't need. And because the whole point of interoperability is that it's a seamless experience between multiple chains. You need to be able to communicate between Ethereum, between Binance Chain, between a list, including Waves, Polkadot, Cosmos, and especially those last two, Cosmos, Polkadot, they each have their own approach on how they think that will be achieved best. And it's a complex like topic. It's one of the big issues, I think, for blockchain, aside maybe scalability, but I think interoperability needs to be solved first.
So let me just ask you then too, how is Gravity different from Cosmos or Polkadot when it comes to cross infrastructure? We've had a lot of questions about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw all of them getting down to the same, like why would I support this, or like what is best, essentially. People also want to know, and it's quite normal, even though we can't really speculate and comment on like financial, like how should I invest, but people want to know why should they invest, or why should they be engaged. And I think the difference here is that Gravity just wanted to achieve maximum interoperability with as little as friction as possible. Okay. So I think, imagine a different scenario. Imagine that the interoperability protocol would have been implemented in Waves. That would have meant that Waves' node structure would have had to be like radically changed in such a way that maybe a lot of the existing things wouldn't work anymore. Additionally, it would also mean that, similar to Cosmos and Polkadot, it would mean that every user that wants to like use Waves for its interoperability features is limited or forced to go through holding a token, which is Waves in that sense, to have any type of interaction between multiple chains. So you would go from chain 1 into or through Waves into chain 2. But that's essentially 3 layers that you're going to, and it's also 3 different types of assets. And that's not always useful necessarily, because you'd have to pay certain things in fee number 1, which is Waves. Right. It's just very complex. And I don't know who like really came up with that idea, but then essentially they said, okay, why do we need a token? Why not take away that token, keep the aspect of having a blockchain in the middle, so there's a Tendermint core at the center of Gravity, but then it's just a set of smart contracts between that core and every chain that it connects to. So Waves isn't necessarily a central protocol in that sense. It's the same, or it has the same position as Ethereum has, or Binance Smart Chain has, or Polkadot will have in the future, or Tron currently already has. Like it's just one of the chains, and they're all essentially equal. But it also means that any developer, because there were quite some questions also in terms of development and how can we boost the development in our own ecosystem and the industry, we just take a friction away. There's no more token that you need to have, and you can communicate, for example, directly between, let's say, ETH and Binance Smart Chain. And you could pay for something on Binance Smart Chain with ETH on ETH. You could pay for those fees. You could put collateral down on other chains, but you wouldn't be limited by that token in the middle. And essentially, that was in terms of practicality, it made sense to just take that token out. Of course, we get a lot of people in our Gravity chat saying, "Sir, when can I invest? When ICO? When token? How much is the token cost? Where does the token trade?" And we try to summarize it with like a cute little GIF saying like, tokens, we don't do that here. Yeah, exactly. But I think it's a unique approach, mainly because, and in the Polkadot white paper, and as Polkadot is growing, they're getting closer to each other. In the white paper of Polkadot, it says entirely at the end, for the near future, we don't foresee Ethereum competing or like having any competition with Polkadot, because we're trying to achieve different things. But as we grow further, that at some point I can hear the flippening sounds already happening between like Polkadot. Like it's bound to happen at some point. And I think it's also our most beautiful, like, let's say, industry characteristic. It's this tribalism, this sheer belief of blockchain is best. And blockchain is best in a sense. Like there's a lot of like really unique things that you can't do in a traditional perspective. But when it's not blockchain versus the world, and it's more like my bag versus your bag, because that's what people like. It's not a utility token anymore. The governance is tied to that asset, like we explained earlier. So people quite literally vote with their money. And I can guarantee you that from the point that two big protocols either have the choice of integrating, but having no certainty on what ecosystem will come out best, because you essentially throw everything open, or people will vote literally with their money, because that's you put your money where your mouth is. And that could lead to a certain level of friction that we wanted to avoid already at day one. It's like day zero exploit that we wanted to like get rid of. And it just makes sense. There's less friction. We don't have that token issue. We don't have this future like financial underwriting issue. Essentially, the ecosystem is underwritten by all the assets on all the different chains. And if one of them fails, or there's a, like, I don't know, a hack that happens, or anything that would happen, it doesn't matter, because the ecosystem, the functionality lives. And that's what Waves wanted to achieve, because they're pretty confident on like, okay, this is what we can build, and all we need to do is bring it to a larger audience without necessarily any benefit there.
Brilliant. All right. I think this is probably our last question, looking at time. But so we've talked about the community. We've talked about interoperability. The thing we haven't yet gotten to is kind of the partner relationships and building out the ecosystem. I've seen a number of partnerships with Wave, and you're working, it seems to be at your ethos to be connecting the ecosystems together. So what's the partner response been so far, and how is it helping you grow?
I think actually I can answer this one pretty easily, specifically because there's such a fair balance between Waves being integrated in Gravity, which would deliver any equal position of any other project that would be integrated as a target chain into Gravity. There's no, can you partner with us because then we get all this like additional traction through our ecosystem? No. If we were to integrate another project, we have like Tron, Binance Smart Chain, Ethereum, and Waves that are connected to Gravity currently, and like we're adding as we speak. But there's no benefit for one over the other. If Ethereum does a lot better, then that's it. But it also means that however good another project does, it gives the people in the other ecosystems access to something better. I mean, it's inherent to interoperability in a sense, so it's not necessarily a feature of like Gravity on its own. But the point is, let's make Gravity like just interoperability focused, and that's it. And any other project is super eager with that, because they sense that it's a fair partnership, and we're receiving super positive feedback on that. There's almost no friction, except in some cases where foundations are just not focused on linking with other ecosystems, and they're more focused on what's happening inside their own. But aside from that, and including the community, we've received pretty positive feedback on that.
Brilliant. Well, the power of shared incentives, eh?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sten, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure, and I've learned a lot. So thanks for simplifying some of that complexity, certainly for me. And a big thank you to both of our communities for joining us and participating in this event. So if your question was asked during today's AMA, you may have won a share of the Waves prize pool. And if you have, it will be deposited into your app in about 14 days. Sten, just if people want to get in touch with you and learn more, can they follow you on Twitter, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You can follow me on Twitter it's at Sten Laureyssens. It's like City Stockholm, but then with an L, so it's pretty logical.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
And of course, you can follow Waves at Waves.
But I would assume that everyone already follows Waves. Right?
Yeah. But if they don't, they should.
But in case, yeah, absolutely.
And to follow crypto.com, it is.
But everyone's following them as well, no?
Well, we hope so, but just in case, it's at crypto.com, and you can stay informed about upcoming events and updates. So keep an eye on our Twitter and our official Telegram channels, and indeed our YouTube channel, where this AMA will be available for replay from today. And just to let you know, our next AMA will be with Alchemy on Tuesday, February 9th at 5 p.m. UTC. And our AMA with Matic will be next Thursday, February 11th at 2 p.m. UTC.
I'll definitely tune in for Matic.
Brilliant. Yeah. Great. See everybody next time.
Yeah. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. I really the questions were amazing. And it shows, like I said, the quality or the engagement of your community. So thanks for watching.
Agree. Thanks, everyone.